Welcome. My name is Renee Forsyth. I'm the Director of Professional Development for Lyme Connect. And to provide a visual description, I am a white female with shoulder-length brown hair. I am wearing a lavender top today, and I'm sitting in front of a lime green branded background. And we're happy that so many of you could join us today to talk about integrating inclusive interviewing practices. And we'll spend the next few minutes covering these topics. So I'll talk a little bit about who we are at Lyme Connect. We'll set the disability landscape. I'll tell you a little bit more about disability, what you might need to know about candidates with disabilities that you might be interviewing, what you can do if a candidate's disability comes up in the interview process, and what tools and resources can help you. So first of all, you may not be familiar with Lyme Connect, so I just want to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about us. We are a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. We do that by attracting high-potential professionals and university students who have all different types of disabilities, including veterans. We attract them into our network. And once they join our network, we work to prepare them with the essential tools and confidence that helps them achieve their goals. And ultimately, we connect our network members for scholarships, leadership programs, internships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations. All of you are corporate partners. Just to be clear, there is no fee for anyone to join our network. People just have to identify as a person with a disability. And if you are joining us and you're a person with a disability, we also encourage you to join our network. In addition, we also support all of you, our corporate partners, in recruiting, onboarding, developing, retaining, and promoting all employees who have disabilities. And together, Lyme Connect, our corporate partners, and our network members, we are all celebrating the strengths and talents of people with disabilities. So I know my colleague is putting some information in the chat about how you can join our community. You can join as a person with a disability, if you are a person with a disability as a network member. If you're not a person with a disability, but we do encourage you to join as a corporate partner to access all of our resources. So now to talk a little bit more about disability, whether you're joining us from the US or Canada, disability is broadly defined as a physical or mental condition that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And based on this definition, we know that approximately 61 million US adults are impacted by disability and 8 million adults in Canada have a disability. So approximately 1 in 4 North Americans is living with a disability. And to dig further into the statistics, this may be particularly relevant for you if you are interviewing people who are early in their career. We do know that 1 in 5 students on university campuses has a disability, and statistics are starting to show that that number is even increasing. We also did some research a few years ago with the Center for Talent Innovation and discovered through that research that almost 1 in 3 white-collar corporate employees has a disability, so approximately 30%. Now, if you're looking around in your office or on your team, or even thinking of people that you may have interviewed recently, and you're thinking, well, I've never interviewed someone with a disability, that may be because that disability is not evident. So approximately 2/3 of all disabilities are non-visible. And so you won't know a person is living with a disability unless they choose to share that information with you. Some of those non-visible disabilities could include learning and attention issues, medical conditions, mental health conditions, and more. And just to further lay the foundation for what we're going to talk about today in terms of disability and defining it, we know that a disability may impact an individual's ability to learn, for example, and we also mentioned their ability to pay attention. It also may impact them intellectually. It may impact their ability to remember. Mental health conditions is a umbrella term for a number of different disabilities, including anxiety and depression. It may impact their ability to communicate. They may stutter, for example. Physical disabilities may be evident upon meeting someone if they use a wheelchair or they are they have an amputation, for example. But physical conditions might also include chronic medical conditions that impact the person day in and day out, but it may not be evident unless they choose to share that. Sensory disabilities are also thought of when someone thinks about the word disability in terms of someone being blind or deaf, but that can also be a spectrum. Someone may be hard of hearing or low vision. Or it may impact their ability to form social relationships. So this is just intended to give you an idea that the term disability is far-reaching. And what I really like about this next slide is that it's not just the way the disability impacts the individual, but it's when that person meets a barrier that's in the environment that doesn't allow them to fully and equally participate. So in your role as an interviewer, think about the way you can remove any barriers during the interview process. So think about your technology and all the accessibility features available in that technology. If you're interviewing people in person in a physical space, is that environment accessible for all people? What is your policy around granting accommodations during the interview process? And how would you, as an interviewer, actually put that into practice? What are some of the assumptions that you bring into the interview process? And just to say, this is not a space of judgment. We all live with assumptions. It's just really important and valuable to recognize that those assumptions can impact your interactions during the interview process. What language and action can you take to make sure that you're creating an inclusive environment and a culture that is supportive of people with disabilities? And one of the things we do like to talk about, I talked about language and action. Often people feel uncomfortable when talking about disability because they're not sure what language to use. And we have an image here of 12 of our different network members, and their preferences for language may be as different as the 12 of them. So really you want to defer to the person for their preferred language. Now, if you're meeting a candidate for the first time, you may not understand or know what their preferred language is. There's really two avenues. There's the person first language or a person with a disability. Some people prefer to say, my disability is just one aspect of me and it's just one characteristic. Other people say, I'm identity first. Being disabled is a key part of me and it's not a bad word. So I prefer to refer to myself as disabled. At Lyme, we use the two interchangeably, but certainly once you know what a person's preference is, you'll want to defer to that type of language. There is language that you want to avoid because it's dated. Handicapped or crippled are not words that we generally use anymore. Suggesting that someone is suffering from a disability makes them a victim when they may not feel like a victim, or using different euphemisms, such as special needs, differently abled. Generally, our network members tell us it's not a bad word to say disability or disabled, so just call it what it is. Excuse me. And you really want to be aware of unintended offensive language. So this is a reference to referencing a disability when you don't live with that disability or in a joking manner. To say something like, oh, I'm in an organizational mood today and my OCD is really acting up, or I had a panic attack. And really when you tune into that type of language, you'll notice that it's used more frequently than it should be. And that doesn't really create a culture for people with disabilities to feel safe in talking about or disclosing their disability. So what do I need to know about candidates with disabilities? So we'll explore in the next few slides your role as an interviewer and how you can understand the disclosure decision for people with disabilities, recognize how disabilities might present in an interview, identify what to do if a candidate talks about their disabilities, and challenge some assumptions about candidates' capabilities, candidates with disabilities. So at Lyme Connect, We never tell people that they have to disclose. So we often coach around this disclosure decision and sharing about a disability in different settings. So it's a very personal decision, and we encourage people to think about whether, when, and how to disclose. So whether it is the right environment for them to disclose, what their needs are, when to do it, and how to do it to set themselves up for success. And I think as an interviewer, it's really helpful to understand what this concern is around disclosure. And these are some of the top reasons that people in our network have indicated that they are concerned about disclosing. And these are actual quotes from our network members. Um, the belief that people will judge me before they know me. I tell people only what is relevant to the situation. I try to tell them as little as possible because I know they'll think of me as different and potentially inept. Other people have a fear of negative reactions or perceptions. In some cases, they may have had a bad experience in the past when they've talked about their disability, and they bring that into every future decision about disclosing. This person said, always requesting accommodations and disclosing can be hard. It is like you are always explaining and answering questions and receiving either petty remarks or hero remarks about how you do what you do. Certainly, this is one that comes up over and over again, concerns that it will impact my career. If I am one of two candidates that a company is considering and I disclose that I have a disability and need an accommodation to do the job, why would they choose to hire me? So that's very relevant for you as an interviewer to understand that people have these concerns, especially in a competitive recruiting process. Or maybe they don't know how to have the conversation, whether you live with a disability or not. I think this quote really hits home. There aren't many opportunities in the workplace where a discussion of vulnerability takes place in a frank manner. And I think that feels especially true when someone is interviewing for a job. But these are often the different touch points when we get to the when of disclosing that people are making that decision about whether to disclose or not. And it comes as early as the application process. So when they're filling out an application and they're determining whether to check that box that they're a person with a disability or not, they're deciding even at that moment. Most people don't know what happens with that information. They don't necessarily know that the interviewer isn't seeing that information. So it is a decision process. They also may be looking for signals from your company that you're a company that will support people with disabilities. So even looking on your website, looking for signs of support of individuals with disabilities. They may disclose prior to the interview. So if they have enough information and they recognize that they're going to need an accommodation to be successful in the interview, they may request that accommodation. It may also happen during the interview, and we'll talk about what to do in just a moment if that's when it happens. Often people choose to just wait until they receive the offer, but they know they need an accommodation to be successful on the job, so they may disclose at that point, or they may choose to disclose once they're employed. Perhaps they didn't need anything in the recruiting process, or they're just more comfortable on the job. What's not on here is that they choose never to disclose, and that may be fine for them, but in some instances, it may not allow them to be their most successful in the workplace, and so, or even in the recruiting process. And so you may be missing out on that disabled talent. So let's talk up for a moment about how disability might show up and might appear to you as an interviewer. So there's oftentimes that we hear about different impressions that a candidate might make that could be related to their disability characteristics. I was a recruiter. I did a lot of interviewing in my previous jobs. And I know that you're always looking for someone who's very passionate about the company, really express very dynamic interest in the role. And that may not be possible for all individuals. People may have different disabilities that affect their affect. impact their affect or their ability to really communicate that passion and desire. But that doesn't indicate that they're not really excited about the role. Perhaps they appear very distracted. Maybe you are conducting an interview in a very noisy, um, bright lights setting, and they find that distracting, and that's related to their disability. Or we talked earlier about the difficulty forming social relationships. So for some people, the small talk of interviews is very challenging for them, and so they appear disengaged and really aren't able to make that connection with the interviewer. There's also standard recruiting practices that you might often look for, such as eye contact. We have people who, even in a networking setting, they're low vision, and they have to determine whether they tell the person that they're networking with that they won't be able to make eye contact related to their disability. So it's those types of decisions that are coming into play for candidates all throughout their career search process. Perhaps they aren't able to give a strong handshake, or maybe they're not able to dress in business attire or a suit for needs related to their disability. So all of those things are considerations that may make an impression that's related to one's disability and not their passion or commitment to the role. So it always comes back to thinking, is that an essential function of the role? And then again, we talked about assumptions at the top, and I love this image that says limiting beliefs do not equal facts. So just because I may meet someone and they have a certain disability, and I may think to myself, how could they possibly do XYZ job, doesn't make it real. So in your role as an interviewer, give people the opportunity to demonstrate how they have the skills and abilities to do that particular role. As this person said, one of our Lyme Network members, sometimes with disabilities, the bar is set very low. Even just going to college can be seen as this great success, but that doesn't set a path for reaching a really high level of potential, and Lyme Connect doesn't settle for that. And what I love to say at this point is that it's our Lyme Network members that don't settle for that. We have really high achieving network members who just happen to live with disabilities, and they bring all of these incredible strengths and skills to the workplace. We surveyed our network members and said, tell us how your disability has impacted you. And they came back with these amazing stories of the strengths that they developed and the skills that they have that they bring to the workplace as a result of living with their disability, not despite living with their disability. So these are just some examples of, and I'll give you a few details of it, but really think about it in the interview, how to draw out of the person that you're talking to what strengths they bring to the workplace and what skills they can apply to that particular role. And that's a great interview if you're able to do that. So some examples of people living with disabilities talked about how they're an incredible problem solver because they've always had to navigate a world that was not accessible for them. Maybe they demonstrated leadership on campus in advocating for the rights of people with disabilities, or in developing an ERG at their company, or even in just advocating for their own needs in different medical situations. Perhaps they're a unique strategic thinker that because they always had to learn differently. We have people talk about being incredibly organized and always delivering ahead of time because they're never quite sure when their symptoms might flare up. So they always make sure to get their work done ahead of time. Determination and resilience are words that came up over and over again in overcoming or dealing with challenges that maybe they realized their peers didn't have to deal with, and always finding a way to be successful in those scenarios. And then specialized skills, which can be really helpful in an interview in trying to understand how people can apply those skills to your role. We had people talk about how they're able to see patterns that they realize their peers aren't able to see, Or we had someone talk about his neurodiversity led to him developing really efficient systems that helped his company to be more successful. Other people who talked about learning differently had a unique curiosity. So they were always asking questions that helped their entire team get to better results and better answers. Or they could always tell when someone in a room wasn't understanding a presentation, and they were able to present it more creatively because they understand that there are different learning styles. We had someone who's deaf, who's blind, who talked about how he hones his listening skills, and he's an attorney, and that enables him to be a really effective mediator because he can always tell when the other party is wavering. We've had people who in management roles who have been able to be really effective because they lived with a disability, and they recognize that individuals have different needs in the workplace, whether they are disabled or not, and they're always able to treat their team individually to get the most out of them. And I think what I've seen over my 10 years at Lyme that's so incredibly impressive is the advancements in accessibility and technology that our network members have been able to impact in their individual workplaces. So often people have lived their life using technology to make their world more accessible. So they have a unique view that they can bring to the workplace. And no matter what role you're in, I'm sure having an accessibility service or a product, or just using technology in an accessible way is an important part of your business. So what to do if a candidate's disability comes up in the interview? So we talked about the different touch points. I apologize. It could happen. So someone might choose to disclose prior to the interview. And if that happens, it's probably maybe not your responsibility, but you're just receiving the information that they've requested an accommodation. In that instance, your role is to ensure you provide the established accommodation. So we've had people who have an experience when they're told they're going to get an accommodation, they get into the interviewer, and the interviewer has decided that they don't want to grant that accommodation, or that the person doesn't need that accommodation. So in this instance, if the team has determined that the accommodation is required and available, then your role as an interviewer is to provide the accommodation. If there are standard accommodations that you can provide, I encourage you to do that, such as live captions. Turning anything on or using the chat to put a question in there. Any of those things really demonstrate to people that you are sensitive to the needs of people with disabilities, or just generally using all the tools that are accessible. So anything that you can use like that, I encourage you to do so. We're all often doing this in a virtual world. So just being prepared for technical difficulties, understanding that for any candidate, I think when there's technical difficulties, it increases the anxiety level of what's already a stressful situation. But for people with disabilities, that can even be more heightened. So having some backup, making sure you get back to the candidate if there are technical difficulties, can be really valuable. Now, it may come up during the interview, and I can see three potential scenarios why it might come up. The candidate might disclose and need an accommodation during the interview. So they might realize when they're in the setting that they need something to be able to be successful and continue in the interview. The second reason might be they disclose because they need an accommodation to do the job, and they're trying to assess whether they can get that accommodation, or it might just come up through the line of questioning. Or they might answer a question with an example related to disability, in which case you might not need to do anything additional. They might just be talking about how they developed a certain skill or how they overcame a challenge. So those are three potential scenarios. And depending on what the scenario is, In all these instances, you'll want to make sure you're leaning on your recruiting team or your accessibility team, whoever is the appropriate people internally, to get the support you need to make sure that the candidate has a good experience. So let's say that you're in the interview and your candidate discloses, then what do you do? Well, hopefully I've demonstrated that it's most likely a very personal decision and it's well thought out. So first and foremost, receive that information as just one human to another and recognize that it's a personal decision. You can say something like, "Thank you for sharing this with me. Do you think you need an accommodation to continue the interview?" Again, if that person, it seems like they might need an accommodation to be successful in the interview process. You're not promising anything, you're just asking what the need is. What you do want to do from there is make sure you're responsive to whatever the next step is. The worst scenario is when people feel like they get ghosted when they do disclose and they never hear from the company again. So you can say something like, "I'm going to contact the appropriate people to identify next steps and discuss what options we have for supporting you." So again, not promising anything, but then go get the support of your recruiting team, figure out next steps, and ensure that the candidate does get a response in some way. And then we get back to the assumptions. So when you're in the debrief with all the team who's been doing the interviewing, just remember how assumptions may come into play and be tuned into the comments that are being shared about the particular candidate. Remember how disability might present in an interview, some of those characteristics. You're not intended to be a mind reader. Just because someone seemed disengaged or distracted doesn't necessarily mean that they have a disability, but it's just something to consider. Check for any unintended bias around capabilities. This may come into play particularly if someone does disclose or if they have a visible disability and people are making assumptions about what they are capable of without giving them the opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities. So you'll always want to bring the conversation back to what the individual's strengths and skills are, not focusing on their limitations or their perceived limitations, and that's a really important distinction. And recognize that the value of diverse perspectives on a team. It's really important to have a variety of perspectives to be able to really have the most productive team. And sometimes we hear that people believe that accommodations that might be granted during the interview process or on the job provide people with an unfair advantage. And I think it's really important to note that accommodations are really just designed to level the playing field. So when a world is inaccessible for people, accommodations can make that world for some individuals accessible and allow them to be their most productive and do their best work. So what tools and resources can help me? This is the last section. I'll move through it quickly. Well, first of all, we can. At Lyme Connect, we are your partner. We scrape all of your jobs. You're all joining us from partner companies, and we scrape all of your roles daily. And our network members can access full-time and internship roles at your particular companies. We are happy to highlight particular roles that you have or events or programs. We're always looking for opportunities to highlight those great experiences at our partner company. We can also help you if you're looking for a particular role. We can see if we have anyone in our network who might fit that as a criteria. So we're your partner in recruiting. We're also here for learning and training and education. We can do partner specific training at your company. We've done it at a number of your companies. We have webinars like this quarterly. And we have a number of different webinars this month because it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So if you have others on your team who are looking to grow in their own awareness, please encourage them to join us for a future session. We have a general session next week, and so I'd love to see some more people attending that as well. We also have different events throughout the year focused on thought leadership in the disability space, and we have different sessions focused on deeper dives into particular disabilities. So for example, in November, we're having a panel discussion on people who live with people who live with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So you can see a number of those on our website if you're looking to learn more, and just continue to tune in and see what else we're offering in the coming months. So finally, some additional resources. Your HR and recruiting team, especially in the interview process, will be really valuable. So if you have additional questions about what your internal process is, I encourage you to go back to that team and find that out. Your disability ERGs are such a valuable resource for learning more about disability. You can attend their events as an ally if you're not a person with a disability, and just really support their efforts. I also encourage you, if you are trying to sell your company, which we're always doing with our top candidates, make sure you're talking about all your ERGs as valuable resources and benefits to potential employees, including the disability ERG, because again, 2/3 of all disabilities are non-visible. You don't know who you're talking to who might be living with a disability or have a family member who is. And your employees with disabilities often know, your candidates often know what they need. They're just not sure what type of accommodation to ask for in the workplace always. So having that dialogue can be really helpful. Again, that may not be your role, that may be the role of someone else that you get support from, but just knowing that people with disabilities often know how to accommodate themselves personally, but maybe not in the recruiting process. Hopefully you will join our Lime community platform where you can access this recording and a number of different resources. We have toolkits that you can download, written documents about the interviewing process and recruiting process for people with disabilities. So it's a lot more detailed information. If you are looking for particular information about a specific disability, I encourage you to check out askjan.org. It's a US government site. They have an A to Z of all types of disabilities and common accommodations for those disabilities. So if you're looking to educate yourself about something, that's a good website to check out. So again, if you're joining us as a person with a disability, please join our network, but definitely also join the network as a corporate partner to access all of those resources. I'm Renee Forsyth, Director of Professional Development. I'm happy to hear from you if you have any additional questions. If you're in the US, Jennifer Grauso is your liaison. So if you would like to get more involved in our recruiting events, one's happening tonight in Canada. I think we have one next week. That's Karen Kelsey is in Canada. So if you want to get more involved in our Canadian partnership, you can reach out to Karen. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions. Feel free to put a question in the chat if you have any. There was a question in the Q&A. What about candidates who need accommodations because they need to support family members with disabilities? So certainly that's something I would encourage you to talk to someone internally about. You're going to have your own policies about what's reasonable, or if that requires a different kind of family leave. So those are questions I would try to get answered internally. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at a future event. Have a great day.